Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. My dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to thank you for coming. I understand that this topic was a bit maybe vague or maybe challenging for some, but thank you for coming, and may Allah reward and bless you all. I'm disappointed at the turnout, but that's to be expected. There's a saying that says, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. So I want to begin with that saying and set that as the beginning or the intro to my talk. All of us are familiar with our history. And when I say our history, I'm talking about as an ummah. Prior to Islam, we lived in darkness, jahiliyyah, tribalism, merciless, cruel, barbarity, mistreatment of women, mistreatment of people of different races. And despite all that arrogance that we exhibited as a people, we were still the lowest of the low. The Romans and the Persians did not even look in our direction, nor did they care for us. We were the laughing stock of the world. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored us with this message of Islam. And this message of Islam took us from being zeros to being heroes in no time. So when we look at the division that existed amongst us as a people, we recognize that it was Islam and only Islam that had the ability to unify us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِهِمْ لَوْ أَنفَقْتَ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا مَا أَلَّفْتَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِهِمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ أَلَّفَ بَيْنَهُمْ إِنَّهُ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took these people who fought even members of their same tribe, who belonged to a different branch. They fought them for absolutely no reason and unified their hearts. And not only did it unify the Arab, it unified the non-Arab. And we saw examples of the Prophet ﷺ alongside with Bilal and Suhaib al-Rumi and Salman al-Farisi, and then later on the greatest heroes of Islam happened to be from all various different backgrounds, whether it be Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Sibawayh, so when we Qutuz and so on and so forth. When we hear of these honorable people, we know that it was Islam that took these people and elevated them. Because whether it be the Arab or the non-Arab, they all lived a very lowly existence. One that revolved entirely around shahwa. And then when we look at what Islam did to us as a people, now we had the Prophet ﷺ ruling over us, followed by Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali, all the way until Abdul Hamid II, a unified ummah, a glorious ummah with centers of learning. People would go to Baghdad, Damascus, Cordoba, Qayrawan for education, for comfort, for the most beautiful experiences and the most luxurious of accommodations. So this was our situation. And it's important for me to remind us of our past because our existence in America is not excluded from that. It's important for us to make that connection, because if we don't make that connection, then we really don't understand the situation that we're in. And we fail at tackling the problems that we currently suffer from. So I can summarize my whole talk with the saying of Umar radiallahu anhu, wherein he said, لَقَدْ كُنَّا أَذِلَّاء فَعَزَّنَا اللَّهُ بِالْإِسْلَامِ فَإِنْ ابْتَغَيْنَا الْعِزَّةَ بِغَيْرِهِ أَذَلَّنَا اللَّهُ. We were a lowly people and Allah honored us with Islam. And if we seek honor with other than Islam, Allah will humiliate us. So this is really the summary of my talk. However, I'm going to go into a little bit more depth and talk about how we ended up here so that we understand how to deal with this situation properly. So the history of Muslims in America is not new. It actually goes back to 1830, I believe. And if we wanted to go back even further, the slaves that were brought here, a good percentage of them were Muslims. However, those people were detached from their understanding of Islam, and naturally they were going to be assimilated and absorbed and become Christians and take on their slave masters' last names and set up churches and so on and so forth, and without any knowledge of their history. So those people are excused and they're excluded from this equation. I'm going to go to 1830. 1830, we had Muslims that were here and they came here for trade. And then from 1830 to 1870, they prospered. They took merchandise back and forth between the Ottoman Khilafah and the United States or America. And the Khilafah was actually on good terms with America. So treaties existed in which America would recognize and honor the citizens of the Khilafah and treat them favorably because of the trade that existed between them. And there are various treaties that would underline how they would respect the Mohammedans, they called them, and respect their Sharia and give them the ability to practice their Islam without any interjection or any coercion on the part of the United States. And the Khilafah would gift them various different things. We understand that they helped them build some libraries, and we all know the story of the famous Ottoman soldier, Ali al-Hajjaya, who was sent here to help the Camel Corps because they didn't have camels in their army, and he trained them and so on and so forth. And there's a monument now that honors him in Arizona. So we're on good terms, favorable treatment. But now we fast forward to the influx of new migrations and new Muslims. Unfortunately, the first generation naturally would dissolve into the American fabric because of what? Because the availability of Islamic knowledge wasn't there. And a lot of these people were so spread out that they didn't have a community in the real sense. Figures put them at close to 800 at most, all throughout the United States. And they only came for one purpose and one purpose alone: trade. They weren't coming as an inferior group of people to a superior culture or civilization. That wasn't the case. There were people who recognized that there was money that could be made. However, in 1945, 46, 47, 48, the US knew that Palestine was going to be surrendered. They knew that. They had those talks going on. They were aware of what the Brits were up to. And the British and the Americans and the Jewish agency were bribing a lot of people to make it easy for Palestinians specifically to migrate to the Americas and primarily to the United States. So you found a new influx of Palestinians because they wanted to vacate that land and give it to the Zionists in the United States. So this is a new migration. This is a migration of refugees who've lost their home. Okay? So now we have a devastated people coming here, treating this as a safe haven, not understanding that this was orchestrated to flush them out or empty out Palestine, specifically the areas that they had plans for to surrender to the Yahud. So then we go further and we find that there were the civil wars in Lebanon and Yemen also contributed to bringing people here. You had Somalia and the hardships that were going on there and the crises that was going on there. Then you had the 70s where you had the Iran, the revolution, and we say the American-backed revolution, obviously. And we had the 1979 where America now was actually funding and supporting a lot of these Muslims to go and fight communism and using Islam, leveraging Islam to do what? To push communism back and to prevent it from expanding, because at that time, communism was a real threat to capitalism and not Islam. Islam was yet on the surface, so they figured they can use us. And then we have the 90s and all the various different economic catastrophes, culminating to what? The American invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, and of course all due to 9/11. So now you have the Muslims that lived in America. We're dealing with so much baggage. The baggage that their parents, their grandparents brought. In addition to that, the fear of being marginalized, of being threatened, of being arrested, surveyed, and so on and so forth. So all this came about and built the mindset that we currently have. It created this mindset that we currently have. So rather than the 1830s and 70s being the standard, what ended up happening was all that happened post World War II. Okay? We came here, and excuse me for using certain terminology, we came here as riffraffs, beggars, people who are devastated, people coming from crises, and America now was a safe haven for us. It was our Jannah. You know, a lot of these people were coming here, and they brought a lot of the garbage that they suffered from back home here. So not only were we dealing with the fact that we were detached from our Khilafah, with the collapse of the Khilafah, the Ottoman state, not only that, now we're dealing with the byproduct of that collapse. So people who were leaders in certain parts of Yemen, people who were leaders in certain parts of Lebanon, people who were leaders in certain parts of Jordan, based on neo-colonial agendas and so on and so forth, brought that with them. So they brought only the division that existed amongst them. They brought that Shamali Junubi, they brought that Islahi or whatever, they brought that communist, capitalist, they brought all that with them. And they brought it into the masajid now. And anyone who's familiar with the masajid in the 70s, the masajid did not function in the manner that they do today. Not to say that they are better today, but they didn't function in that capacity. People would pray Jum'ah on Sundays. They'd have mixed weddings in the basement. That was their banquet hall. So the masjid was always looked at as trying to obtain sustenance, to find sources of funding in order to keep its doors open. So therefore, if it did gravitate, it gravitated towards that which was part of the status quo, not that which is not part of the status quo. And it was always looking for ways to appeal to the masses. So, my dad tells me stories of him going even to the Dick's Mosque, and they'd be smoking in the basement, and mixed weddings and music playing. So this is something that you can go and ask about. This is what was going on. A lot of the people who actually built these masajid were people of also questionable gains. It's not like these are people who every penny that came into their pocket was halal. No, these were people who didn't understand halal and haram, or they had this mindset, oh, well, we're living amongst kuffar, who cares how we make our money? So much so that people who owned liquor stores, and a good percentage of our community, their parents actually owned liquor stores. You can also go and verify that. They would convince their women that if you put gloves on, then it was halal for you to handle liquor. This is the decline level that we were at. And although we in some ways improved, there's still a lot of decline thinking amongst us. So 9/11 comes along, and now Muslims, unfortunately, are just sitting there trying to defend themselves. No, we're not terrorists, we're not murderers, we're not killers, we're not this, we're not that. So this lowly mindset seeped into our youth. We're always apologizing. Oh, we didn't do this, we didn't do that. There's no izzah, no honor, nothing at all, not even on the manabir. I remember attending a Jum'ah khutbah when the San Bernardino thing happened, where the Imam already incriminated the two, even though there was no evidence provided. So this forced a lot of us to do what? To go to the polls, to vote. Because now we wanted to have something to say about what's going on. We're being demonized, and our knowledge of Islam was so flimsy that we're like, oh, Barack, Hussein, Obama? Hussein, he's a Muslim. Not caring about what he's ruling by, the fact that he has a Muslim name was enough for us to go to the polls. So this is the inferiority that we reached. And this is the disgraceful behavior that a lot of our leadership has manifested. Now when we look at the involvement of Muslims into politics in America, it really happened around the time that Jesse Jackson came to office. He realized that he had no chance to win. He was looking at all these marginalized groups. He's like, oh, Arab, come on, you guys can help me out. And a lot of them, the ones with money, they're like, okay, well maybe let's find ways to make more money, because that's usually what politics is for. If you get involved in politics, you got money and you want more access. So you get involved, and the masses are just following blindly. They actually think that there's some benefit in it for them, but in reality, it's those who have taken advantage of those who don't. And then you had a lot of civil rights issues, and Muslims are good people. Yeah, we don't like this discrimination, we don't like what's happening to blacks or whites or whatever, and we jump on every bandwagon so that we can somehow contribute. Forgetting that we have all the solutions, we jump on, we're like, okay, let's do something good, And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly condemns those who just follow blindly, especially when you are ashab risalah. And like Brother Jabir recited, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. So you are the best nation set forth for mankind, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put restrictions. You command what is right and forbid what is wrong. Of course you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but commanding the right and forbidding the wrong is what defines us as a community, what defines us in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how we get judged. There's a serious call to action. So now we look at our current situation. So we have people who came from Yemen because of economic and political upheaval. Sudan and Somalia, same thing. Afghanistan and Iran, same thing. And then you have the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring brought with it a lot of people from Syria, devastated people. People now, they've identified who their enemy is, but they're still timid, they're still scared, they're still trying to navigate the life in America, and they don't have the ability to speak out. And then you have the civs and these special immigration visas. And unfortunately, these are the people who were helping the Americans occupy their own lands. Some of them came with the recent takeover of the Taliban from Afghanistan, and some of them came after, the takeover of Iraq by the American troops. These people are people who were already helping the enemy abroad, and they came here and they're helping them probably locally. So this is the dynamics that we're dealing with. People with all types of varying views on life. People who are hostile to Islam, and people who are straight up cowardly, and people who are ignorant. Okay? And then we have masajid who are literally set up as a business and nothing more, nothing less. I was just looking at a flyer today for one of the masajid that just opened up. Actually, I think it's called the biggest masjid in North America. And they have a musical concert October 3rd for $60 tickets. And they're doing this in the masjid. They're not doing it at a concert hall. They're doing it because at the end of the day, it's about money, keeping the doors open. So this is where we are, okay? Now the mindset we have, unfortunately, should have been, we are a people who represent Islam. We are part of an ummah. We just came from a recently decommissioned or dismantled khilafah. Okay? We have a legacy of 1300 years now we have to preserve. We came here, it's 1830, alhamdulillah, everything's fine. 1870, everything's fine. 1924, khilafah is destroyed. So the first thing that should trigger us, the first thing that should pop in our heads is that our khilafah has been dismantled. Our unity has been gone, okay? Has been devastated. The West has just carved us up and gave us all these different flags and all these different constitutions. So what do we do here? We're in America. Let's at least keep that unity alive in our hearts. Let's keep it alive in the minds of our children. Let our children understand where we came from. We're not the byproduct of all this garbage that came post-occupation. We came from the Ottoman Khilafah, and then it was destroyed, and we found ourselves in North America. So now what do? We should tell those who are coming from Muslim lands, okay, how to best protect their identity. What is our motivation for being here? It should be preserving our deen. That should have been the standard for every single person that came or found himself in this situation. Whether they be here or there, is preserving our deen. How would have that changed the trajectory of our lives? It would have changed drastically. So much so that we would have right now, we'd be talking probably, I'd be giving this lecture in Arabic possibly. Why? Because we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged that if people are in travel, that they make one of them an emir, okay? Anytime 3 people are in travel, one of them should be made an emir. So the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to always have unity, okay? So that unity in America could have manifested itself by saying, okay guys, all this sectarian nonsense that's back home, that's been Western backed, we're not gonna bring it here, okay? We're gonna be an example to educate people on how damaging this is. All this nationalistic garbage, we're not gonna subscribe to it. Ethnic, racist, we're not gonna subscribe to any of that. We want somebody who represents us, represents our deen, and we tie their hands with Quran and Sunnah. Now I understand there's varying views in Islam, we take the common denominator, the qat'i issues amongst us, and we tie the hands of our leadership to that. We say, okay, we want somebody to represent us. So what do we want? We want these masajid that we have here to be fortresses to protect our identity in the West. Okay? So how do we do that? We have the ability to take all this money that these masajid are generating and fund education primarily for this community. This community should have kids who are speaking Fusha fluently, who understand the Quran and have it memorized, who can understand the evidences. This should have been our focus. When it comes to marriage, these masajid should have also functioned in a manner to where they preserve the community by even having matrimonial networking to where they know who's qualified for who and who's looking to get married and who's capable of getting married and who's not, so that they can help them out. So the focus should have been the community and only the community. Instead, what ended up happening is that these masajid brought all this baggage with them from these colonized, destroyed political entities, these trash entities, brought them here, and now our kids, instead of being prioritized and our community being prioritized, the masjids sustainability was being prioritized, and they were avoiding all the hot topics and only concerned about making money and only money. And what ends up happening is we get so many converts, the amount of converts that we get is negated by the amount of people who leave Islam. I hate saying this, but sometimes I'm happy when there's a azah, when there's a funeral amongst my relatives, because that's the only time I see some of my relatives. I don't see them at Jum'ah, I don't see them at Taraweeh, I don't see them in any Islamic function, but the only time we see them is when a father dies and the kids themselves don't even know how to read the Fatiha. So we sit there and we talk about, oh mashallah, this boxer, that wrestler, this dancer, this whatever became a Muslim. We're losing just as many Muslims, grandsons and granddaughters of Muslims, to kufr. But nobody talks about that. And when they go, you know, the common criticism that they have, I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine last week. And he was like, Haitham, none of Islam doesn't appeal to me. He was telling me that. I'm like, what doesn't appeal to you? He's like, I see the hypocrisy when I go to the masajid. I'm like, but what about us? He's like, you guys are not the norm. So the thing is that, unfortunately, a lot of people have left a bad taste of Islam in the mouths of the youth, to where they're not able to see how Islam is a source of salvation and a solution to all problems. Now, had we exhibited that honor, that dignity, that belief in our system, and we carried Islam as an ideological force, the West would have looked at us differently. They would have respected us. They were like, oh no, these guys are not Jordanian, they're not Yemeni. No, these guys are not Pakistani. These guys are the descendants of the Ottoman Caliphate who found themselves in North America. We have treaties where we treated them favorably and we allowed them to practice their Sharia to the fullest. These are different people. They don't carry that baggage that currently the Muslim world suffers from. So they would have treated us in the manner that we wanted to be treated, we should be treated, which is as Muslims and only Muslims. So again, the issue of us as an ummah, this standardization or this yardstick that I'm trying to hold us to obviously can't be done. The reality is that, or maybe it can. Maybe this generation will be the one that kind of corrects the community and brings it back on course and says, listen, Imams, we want all the money that's being generated through the masajid to go to our education, and this is what needs to be taught, and this is what we need to do. But the truth of the matter is there needs to exist a group, okay? There needs to exist a group at all times that does what? The commanding of the right and forbidding of the wrong. The thing about commanding of the right and forbidding of the wrong is that people don't take lightly, is that when you're commanding the right and you're forbidding the wrong, people are aware of the fact that there's a right and there's a wrong. And what are you backing it with? Evidence. So you're making people educate themselves on evidence. When you do that, the community now revolves around evidence. What's your dalil? What's your dalil? What's your dalil? What's your dalil? If you do that, you get the results that you want. You get the results that you want. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. As a community, we need to come together for good and not for bad. So the only good is Islam and only Islam. So as a community, we need to define ourselves. Who are we? We're Muslims. What are we held to account by? By Islam. This is the ta'awun. So okay, let's help each other out. What are our priorities? Our priorities is not getting this candidate into office or that candidate into office. That's not what our purpose is. If Allah is saying, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, why am I sitting there begging Ammo, Bernie, and Khalto, Kamala for nothing? You know? Why am I sitting there patching up a failed system? Why am I instilling confidence into the system that I myself am obligated to replace, to offer solutions to be an alternative to? So why am I doing that? And this is why it becomes necessary for us to understand that we are an ideological ummah. What does that mean? We are an ideological ummah. That means we have a comprehensive system. We have a comprehensive set of solutions for the whole of humanity. This is how we should talk. This is how we should articulate. When you go to these masajid and you hear the khatibs and we're talking about, oh brothers, go out there and vote. You're like, are you reading the same Quran? وَنَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَلَا تَتَّبِعَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ وَاحْذَرْهُمْ أَن يَفْتِنُوكَ عَنْ بَعْضِ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ. A portion of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to you. Is this guy reading the same Quran? So that you really sit there and think to yourself, أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول. Referring back to Allah and His Messenger. This yardstick clearly is not being exhibited in our masajid, and we need to. We need to remind these people. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning you. أفتؤمنون ببعض الكتاب وتكفرون ببعض فما جزاء من يفعل ذلك منكم إلا خزي في الحياة الدنيا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do you believe in parts and disbelieve in parts? So again, this community needs to come back to this deen. Understand that we are obliged to implement this deen in its totality. Yes, we are in North America, we're not trying to implement it, but we are still part of an ummah, and that ummah is devastated. That ummah is still suffering from the absence of Islam as a way of life, as a system. And we find ourselves here without that system, without that, I always equate it to fish out of water that we need to stay alive. So what do we need to do now? We need to make that the attention of all our conversations. So our primary focus should be protecting our identity. That should be our sole focus, is protecting our identities, preserving our community. So making sure wallahi, I have a problem with this. And I'll say this and some guys might get offended by it. The amount of effort that we put into raising some of the most upright daughters, and we leave these boys out to wander about, and then when it comes to getting them married off, it's a complete mismatch. So clearly we're not doing our utmost to protect this community from an aqeedah standpoint, from successful family standpoint, to ensure successful families. All this is being done before our very own eyes, and the masajid do not make it a priority. So again, a strong community that revolves around text is important, that funds its education and makes it independent, that makes the sustainability of our ummah a priority over the sustainability of the masajid. We can pray in parks. Having a big fancy schmancy masjid with plush carpet from Turkey and Mecca means absolutely nothing if the kid who's praying behind you doesn't even know how to make wudu. This has to become a priority. Having a supportive network to where we know that these families where we have righteous daughters marrying righteous sons, where we go there and be like, hey, we heard you're smoking weed, what's going on? Hey, we heard you're not convinced hijab is a fard, what's going on? Getting involved in each other's business like communities should, to protect ourselves. But ultimately we need to remember that we are in a unnatural existence without our khilafah. This is the real focus, this is the real obligation. But in the meantime, let's protect our identity, let's protect our families. So when I named this talk, when I named it At the Mercy of Vultures, what are those vultures? Who are those vultures? Those vultures are anyone and everyone who tries to get us to compromise on any aspect of our deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They want you to compromise so that they too compromise. They accept us. If we compromise, you can wear your hijab with your bangs showing and your, in your whatever, yoga pants, that's fine. But we'll tolerate that hijab temporarily. They want you to compromise and they'll tolerate you temporarily. At the end of the day, our objective is to hold on to every aspect of Islam, even the things that irk them, even the things that bring us under surveillance, even the things that censor us. We need to continue to reflect our aqeedah to the fullest. We need to submit to this deen in its totality. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has warned us. Allah told us about these vultures. It's no mystery. Allah says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ لِيَصُدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسْرَةً ثُمَّ يُغْلَبُونَ. Allah says that these people are going to spend money to corrupt us. They spend money. They spend money on these influencers. They spend money on celebrities. They spend money on movies. They spend money on music. You sit there and you're like, what? That celebrity is a Muslim? No. They're probably intentionally put in that position so that they can do what? So they can corrupt him and him and him. That's how they got there. They'll go get the soccer player, mashallah, he made sujood after a goal, and then you see, fast forward a year later, he's on the cover of some fashion magazine with a bunch of models. We've seen that with our own eyes. They spend money so that what? So that we can look around and see corruption as a norm. And we're like, oh, these are corrupt Muslims and they're accepted. These are corrupt Muslims, they're accepted. Oh, look at this sellout. He's at the masjid. He's actually, the imam's hugging him and kissing him. He's on the minbar and he's sitting there telling us to go out and vote. Recently we have this case of Qadiism, okay, where we had a guy actually get up and he said, in my opinion, I don't think khilaf is not even one of the top, 10 or 20 priorities. He actually took his opinion and equated it to Quran and Sunnah. He had the nerve and the arrogance to equate his opinion to text, to evidence, to dalil. And you know what happened? Nothing. You know why? Because again, our priorities are wrong. Rather than this money going to fund education, to where people say, whoa, what are you doing here? Get the hell out of our mosque. How dare you equate yourself to قال الله وقال رسوله? How can you do that? Like, where did you get this arrogance from? He got it from the number of juhala, ignorant people in the community. So again, why is it that the priority is not educating the masses? Why is it that the priority is not? Because there's people who capitalize on the fact that they have a few more verses memorized than you, and that's how they get that podium, that's how they get that fat check at the end of the day. It's like, oh, I know a little bit more than them. Whereas if everybody knew as much as the imams at the mosque, then you know what? They would be a little bit more hesitant to say the nonsense that they say and that they get away with. And we had a recent one, oh yeah, he was still talking about how he has a crush on Shakira. The type of nonsense that you hear coming out of these people's mouths is ridiculous, but they go unchecked. They go unchecked. Why? Because again, our community has not been armed with the ilm that it needs to protect its identity. Instead, we are victims to an assimilation and an integration agenda. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again tells us, وَلَن تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودَ وَلَا النَّصَارَ حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. Allah tells us, the Jews and the Christians are not going to accept you until you follow their ways. So again, understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونُ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. We have made you a mediating nation so that you may be witnesses over mankind. This is your role. This is your role as a community. It's not that somebody can witness to you. That's what's happening when somebody stands on the podium and tells you vote Republican or vote Democrat. This is what happens. This is what it means. It means that they're witnessing to you. That means they are giving you their way of life and making it yours. They're making it superior to what you have to offer. You're a nobody. Remember, it depends on how you identify yourself. Are you one of those post-colonial Muslims that came from devastated lands and it's at the mercy of America and you're like, please, give us, and then carrying their agendas back home? Or are you a Muslim who is an extension of the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ and his Sahaba and Abdul Hamid II, and you came here and you were treated with respect, and you want to maintain that respect, and you want to maintain that mission of propagating and protecting your deen? So again, our duty is to organize ourselves politically, intellectually, to protect Islam as an ideology, to protect that link to the global ummah, to understand that we have to speak on their behalf, but not by presenting kafir agendas, by presenting Islamic agendas, Islamic solutions. Every problem that arises, our community should be like, what does Allah and His Messenger say? What does Allah and His Messenger say? What does Allah and His Messenger say? Look beyond these nation states. Look beyond all these crises that happened in the past 100 years. Go back to what made the Prophet ﷺ and his companions a glorious group. What made them dominate and what made them prevail and what made them successful. That is the recipe that we should apply. This is what we should be following. You know, the best, what does it say? Nothing will resolve the end of this ummah except what fixed it, the first of this ummah. This is exactly what is needed, is for us to go back to this deen and to apply it in its totality. So again, my brothers and sisters, yes, in my leaflet I was very clear about who to target, the imams, community leaders, and scholars. Because why? Because they share the bulk of the responsibility of what is happening to our community. The fact that we have such a small attendance is in itself proof of how scared or how ignorant this community is, unfortunately. As they're not able to distinguish, they don't have any trust. They don't have trust in the existing ones. I go to their lectures, I go to the lectures that are being done by various different masajid. The attendance is just as low. Don't think it's any bigger. Just because those guys are endorsed and celebrity scholars doesn't mean the attendance is bigger. It's not. The ummah as a whole has lost trust in its leadership. So for those who are sincere, for those who care, for those who are restricted to the hukum, shari'i, then they need to go out there and find these people and regain their trust. And it's not about a trust in me or him. It's a trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His evidences. You present them with evidence. You tell them, listen, you submit to evidence and evidence alone. Nobody's going to disagree with you. But if you say that, submit to this imam or this masjid, that masjid, people are going to be like, well, I don't know, I've seen too many scenarios, especially post-September 11, this bogus war on terror. We found out that a good percentage of our imams were actually, questionable. So now that trust needs to be regained. And the only way it can be regained is when we get people to understand that you are not submitting to anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the evidence that He has provided us with through the Quran and Sunnah. So again, that organization has to be for the purpose of protecting our identity, protecting our community, protecting our families. This is what it's all about. This is the only way we can prevent our flesh from being consumed by these vultures. They're going to consume us. Whether if we do not arm ourselves with proper understanding of Islam, they're going to push us in every which direction they can. Because at the end of the day, they're looking after their own personal maslahah. Whereas our maslahah is inshaAllah al-Firdaus. Al-Firdaus al-A'la too, not just al-Firdaus al-A'la. That's what we should be aiming for as individuals and as a community if possible. And I hope that I wasn't too heavy on you guys. And I hope I didn't say anything that was offensive. And may Allah forgive me and guide me and all of us to what is best.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Haitham. We'll open up the floor now for question and answers. If anybody has any questions, just stand up and ask your question.
You can stand up or you can stand up.
I guess you could go home too.
Huh? No questions? Nothing? That's a good thing or a bad thing? I don't even know. Is it? Can I say something? There's a story and you can look it up. It's an individual by the name of Alvaro Gonzalez. Alvaro Gonzalez was a Muslim who came here in the late 1500s to Mexico. And his name was the Moor of Guadalajara. That was his nickname. He came and he went about Latin America trying to find Muslims so that he can organize and protect the Muslims that were there. There was the Moriscos and there were closet Muslims, crypto Muslims, and he was trying to get them to organize themselves and protect their identity. However, they captured him in Peru and then they ended up starving him to death. So the thing is that we Muslims, whether we look at the example of the Muslims in the Americas before us in the 1500s, or we look at the Muslims in Spain who took the minority fiqh concept, the concept of hiding your identity, none of them existed anymore. They all disappeared. So the issue here is that trying to find comfort, trying to find the non-confrontational route, and thinking that you're going to preserve your deen is nonsense. Nobody's ever succeeded at doing that. All the people that have succeeded at protecting their Islam are the people who are challenging, the people who are vocal, and the people who risk their lives. We're talking right now about Alvaro Gonzalez, and Allahu A'lam, maybe somewhere down the line, 100 years down the line, his story may inspire other people to come to Islam. Because why? Because of his sacrifice. Yeah, he didn't bear the fruits of it yet, but it doesn't mean he won't. Whereas the people who just cowered and stayed silent, they're going to have absolutely zero impact on preserving any identity, because clearly they weren't even successful at preserving their own. So again, you guys, even if you're the minority, don't think that the minority is not capable of making change. All throughout history, the minority is actually the one that's made critical change. Whether it's the minority of Muslims in Mecca or the minority of Muslims in Medina who came together and brought about the first Islamic State. They were the minority, they weren't the majority. And we don't want to lie to ourselves and think that everybody was on board. That's not the case. So it's the sincere minority and that brings about the change. So be amongst that sincere minority and continue, and inshallah Allah will bless you.